Oh, I'm good. I actually have a conflicting meeting that is happening now. I will certainly be there for the board meeting, but I'm only going to be able to stay for a few minutes here.
Okay,
That's okay.
happy to have you.
Thank you.
And Chairman,
You're going to say something?
yeah, I thought Chairman Roberts had joined us, but it's not. Sorry.
All right. So good afternoon to the Finance Committee members, SCC staff, and members of the public. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is now 2:03, and I'll call the roll. Councilman Pelka,
Here, Madam Chair.
Councilman Robertson, or Chairman Robertson, I should say. Councilman Shirley,
Here.
Councilman Walton. We have a quorum. So before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the contributions of Councilwoman Christine Shaw, who chaired this committee as designee of former Treasurer Sean Wooden. I have taken a new role with the new Treasurer, Eric Russell, and have accepted his request to serve as his designee to the council, and as a result, chair of the Finance Committee, which anybody knows me, they know that that's pretty funny, because I majored in communication, so I wouldn't have to do math. Anyway, at this meeting, we're going to have a presentation from Councilman Pelka on behalf of OPM regarding the FY 24-25 recommended biennium budget. And so I will turn it over to him for that presentation. Councilman Pelka, floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks so much, Madam Chair. And selfishly, I'm really glad to have you back, but I know that you have extraordinary commitments attached to your exciting new position at the Treasurer's office. But please extend my gratitude for the opportunity to continue working with you in this capacity. And again, congratulations on this crucial role you're playing for the Treasurer.
Thank you so much.
Just in terms of timeline for where we are, the Social Equity Council voted on a requested budget, I believe in late September, beginning of October, which aligns with OPM's requested deadline for submissions of budget requests for the fiscal 24-25 biennium, the 2 years comprising the biennium. And after the budget was submitted, OPM staff worked with SEC staff and others on various questions to understand the proposal and to learn its contents. And based on review and consultation, developed a recommended budget to return to the SEC to consider. And I appreciate the input provided yesterday and today from members on the recommended budget. And I thought that it would be helpful before turning to the budget to provide some slides regarding the various taxes and revenues, accounts and funds. And so in rapid order, develop something that I won't take too long. It's total of 6 slides, but I hope it'll be helpful context to share, walk through before turning to the budget document I believe members all have. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now for that. Dismiss that, shrink that. I will press this. Very good. So I'm going to go back a slide. So this is just the first slide. And then I thought these different accounts and funds would be helpful for the Finance Committee to see. Many of you may already be well aware of this, so forgive me if it's a review, but it certainly seems helpful. There are 2 accounts to start off with, and then 2 funds to follow. The first is the Cannabis Regulatory and Investment Account, which is a temporary account, non-lapsing, which means the funds automatically carry over for general, within the general fund is where it operates for fiscal 2022 and 2023. The reason this account was created is to cover the upfront costs with, I guess they're not even upfront, but the preparatory costs to develop and prepare the legal and regulated adult use cannabis market. That is because the the law was passed after the budget was approved. So the monies during those, the current fiscal year and the prior one, they're allocated by OPM to state agencies to pay the costs incurred to implement activities authorized under the cannabis law, funded by licensing fees and taxes received within the same 2 fiscal years. And the fund rolls over to the general fund at the end of 23. The social equity and innovation account was a temporary non-lapsing account within general fund for the 2 years. And the monies again are allocated by OPM to state agencies, including the SEC, for specified public social equity purposes and to pay the costs incurred to implement the activities authorized under the Act. Funded by license conversion fees and the Section 149 fees received in that time period. And the balance rolls over to the Social Equity and Innovation Fund at the end of the fiscal year that we're currently in, after repaying $5 million borrowed from the general fund for the startup. The third is the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. It's a permanent, separate, non-lapsing fund that begins the next fiscal year and is held by the treasurer. And it's appropriated for access to capital for business, technical assistance, workforce, education, and community investments. All appropriations shall be dedicated to expenditures that further equity principles. You'll see in a couple slides coming up the OFA Office of Fiscal Analysis fiscal note that was developed for the cannabis law. But here you'll see the first reference to percentage allocations that are automatically set up in the per the law, and that explains how the tax revenues and other revenues collected are entered into the funds. They're appropriated annually by the General Assembly. Finally, separate from the equity work under the Social Equity and Innovation Fund is the Prevention and Recovery Services Fund, similar to the one I just walked through in 3 key respects. It's separate, non-lapsing, beginning, and it's a separate and non-lapsing fund beginning the next fiscal year and held by the treasurer, appropriated for substance abuse prevention, treatment and recovery services, and collection and analysis of data regarding substance use, funded again by a percentage of the tax collected and appropriated annually by the General Assembly. So I think that's how the SEC's work. The council retains discretion over formulating plans and carrying out the its duty. But the reason why OPM and ultimately the General Assembly is involved is because the SEC budget is introduced as part of the governor's budget, reviewed then by the General Assembly, which reaches decisions regarding the final product. There then is passed by a vote and then signed by the governor. So that's why the activities and the process of budget development are proceeding in the manner that you're experiencing, and why that October deadline first took place. Before we go ahead, I wondered, Chair Comer, is there anything you may want to elaborate on? No pressure, but I just wanted to give you a chance just to add anything, any insights you may have.
Yeah, no, I wanted to, I think, and thank you for presenting this. I think it is important to note that under the Social Equity and Innovation Fund, it's okay, that the, all appropriations, and this is in the statute, are to be dedicated to efforts that further equity, right? And so I think that's important to note, particularly as we talk through sort of what's in there and what it can be used for. I also wanted to, and I apologize for neglecting to do so before, wanted to acknowledge Councilman Jefferson, who is here. Although he is not a member of this committee, he is certainly a member of our esteemed council. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Madam. And indeed, yeah, the Social Equity and Innovation Fund language appearing in that third row comes straight from the cannabis law. That's where it is, and that's where the law establishes the percentage allocations. It establishes the nature of the fund as separate, non-lapsing, and lists the purposes for which it can be used. On the next slide is a little bit about how the accounts get funded. You'll see some exact tables in the next slide, but I thought this was helpful in that it shows the fiscal years and how distributions fund the accounts. So for previous fiscal year and the one that we're currently in, the lottery fees and all taxes are placed in a cannabis regulatory and investment account. Conversion fees and 149s go to the social equity and innovation account. The end of the current fiscal year, which will be June 30th, the social equity and innovation account rolls over into the fund after paying the $5 million previously borrowed from the general fund. For the next 3 fiscal years, which includes the biennium and the first 2 years of the 2 years of budget we're looking at, 60% of the tax in the social equity and innovation fund, 25% to the prevention recovery services, and 15% in the general fund. All other fees and taxes go to the general fund. Looking on into the future, into 27 and 28, the percentages shift a bit. 65% going to social equity and innovation fund, that's 5 percentage points more. And 25% to prevention recovery stays flat, and 10% to the general fund, down slightly. And then 2029 and thereafter, that's the final percentages. 75% to social equity, 25% to prevention recovery services fund. So just a kind of a long view of the population of these funds and accounts, and how, again, this listed in statute about exactly where the revenues as they're collected flow. Chair Comer, anything on this slide before we turn to some of the tables?
Nope, nothing for me, but I do want to sort of maybe pause and see if committee or council members have questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had one question for Councilman Palka. The $5 million that is to be repaid, is that taken from the first year allocation to a budget? Is that coming out of there?
That's my understanding. If that's my understanding, but I don't have more details on that. I just recall that $5 million being for startup costs before revenues arrived, but I hesitate to speak exactly to what that $5 million consisted of, aside from being an upfront coverage or sort of loan from the general fund until the revenues came in, but I don't have more details to share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I will add that if my memory serves, right, so the staff that was involved in sort of standing up the program, and all of, the statute has so many agencies that are named in it, and there were staff that had to be added for the purposes of implementing this bill. So that money went to offset those costs because those were upfront costs prior to revenue coming in for the program.
Okay, thanks. My question was essentially, is it, so if we are, as we build a budget and looking for funds to be used for various purposes, we would say that $5 million would come out of the I guess this current fiscal year's allocation.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilman Jefferson?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Madam Chair. So at the end of this year, the Social Equity Innovation account, the money's there, and that's made up of the lottery fees, so on and so forth, to roll over into the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right. And what's the number? Do we have a number? The number that I heard, the amount that's been floating around is like somewhere in the neighborhood of $55 million. Do we have an amount in terms of the account?
I do not have a number for the account. I believe that some estimate of that account the size of the account was used to develop the SEC proposed budget. But I do not have a, to this day, account number.
And other than social equity, the Social Equity Council, who else has access to those monies? Which other agencies? Is there a specific agency? Does someone, and who determines who has access to those monies in the account?
To the account. Is this the fund you're looking ahead, sir, or to the current year?
Yeah, because at some point someone has to make those determinations, right? I mean, it's a big pot of money, and I don't see it just being left there for. So somebody has to know the amount, who has access to this, who are we sharing it with? Clearly, we have access to it, but who are we sharing it with?
I don't believe
Who are
it's
we
being
competing with? Is there? I just trying to get a sense of how this fund, this soon-to-be fund with $55 million in it, will be controlled.
Yes. So the funds, I'm reading the paragraph in the law, and looking at the fund. It is held in the treasurer's office. The fund is held by the treasurer, separate and apart from any other monies, funds, and accounts. Monies shall be appropriated for providing the following, and that's listed on the previous slide. Capital for business, technical assistance for startup and operation of business, funding for workforce ed, and funding for community investment. All such appropriations shall be dedicated to expenditure that furthers the principles of equity. So the appropriated means the General Assembly has to appropriate the funds. So they have to be part of a budget that is approved by the General Assembly. There is no decision maker that has control over the funding. I view it by the nature of the fact that the appropriations need to be made.
Thank you. That answers my question, Councilman
Okay.
Tuttle. Thank you.
You'll see a bit more of the, oops, got a different slide here. Forgive me while I get this set up. Returning to the PowerPoint, when you go to the next slide, you'll see this comes directly from the fiscal note. This is on the, if you look at the cannabis law, there is a Office of Fiscal Analysis note that was created after the passage, and it breaks out the percentage allocation. So that's, I think, sort of, I view it almost as a board that determines as the revenue enter, how it is then sorted into the various funds: general fund, social equity and innovation fund, prevention and recovery services fund. And so that the social equity and innovation fund, that is what the budget was developed in April and submitted for, and that OPM is returning with recommended response to that budget. I think this is something pretty helpful to share, is that in that same fiscal note from OFA, they developed revenue estimates based on the taxes collected from the sale of adult use cannabis. And you can see the estimated revenues for previous fiscal year and the current fiscal year. And the Social Equity and Innovation Fund starts up in 2024 in the subsequent years from there. And you may have noted in the OPM recommended budget that it included expected revenues of 5.8 million and 10.2 million. This is exactly where those numbers were drawn from. Noted at the bottom of the table is that the table does not include one-time revenue from licensing and conversion fees. Those licensing and conversion fees are also going into the social equity and innovation account, and they will roll over into the fund at the end of the current fiscal year. Those funds, I believe, are quite higher than expected, and SEC has properly taken note of that. And the nature of those funds is they're one-time, time-limited on revenues that should not be expected to come into the future. So before I turn, I got one more slide, but I think that might be the matter that's principally before the commission, is that there are revenue estimates for taxes to be collected, and that's carried out by the Independent Fiscal Office. And then there are the one-time funds. You see here that the estimates are on into the future for the tax revenues to be collected from the sales moving forward. And I think what the Social Equity Council proposed budget back in October did was members felt a desire to demonstrate a commitment to spending down all of those funds. And in the last couple of days, I've especially appreciated the concern among members that if the funds are not spoken for, they'll be taken or redirected, perhaps due to an impression that there is not a commitment to spend down. I would note that it has been a lot of work carried out by many members of the council to develop the proposals for the reinvestment and the workforce development. I would have to note also that a lot of this is really developed in just the last few weeks. I believe it was after the last SEC meeting that we received the Excel sheet that contained the proposal for the workforce and community development. And I think the council created a permanent subcommittee to develop it. So it clearly is a work in progress. And where I think we're running into challenges separate from the strongly held views and approach to budget that we all see, is that the time crunch is all landing in January, because in really the next couple of weeks, the governor's budget will be introduced and it has to be brought in balance when it's submitted. And the SEC is still in the crunch because it's awaiting completion of the IMRP consultation of people living in communities impacted by the war on drugs to share their recommendations for reinvestment. The proposal came together just in the last couple of weeks for it. Yet to go into the budget, into the kind of operating budget of the SEC, really a lot of detail is needed to include to lead to confidence rather, that the funds will be spent down in the year that's available, that there are sound estimates for number of people who will be served, the amount spent per person, a solid plan that can lead to ramp up and execution. So there's a reason why I think my appearances as the last couple of days with this budget has been difficult for us to work through. And I want to acknowledge that and know that we had a discussion, I'm sure, to follow. Before I come off camera, I wanted to say come off a PowerPoint. I want to share there are 3 things that I think lead into the budget. Certainly we'll pause before shifting to the budget, and that the recommended budget seeks to match the expected revenues with the SEC's operating needs that came forward, the personnel and other expenses. The real, I think, difference is that the reinvestment, that I think the whole kind of picture for reinvestment was placed in the operating budget of the SEC, and I think that's what we're working through. And that kind of blends the unanticipated one-time revenues generated during the startup of the market. Now, those funds that have been generated have also been deposited into the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. And as I mentioned before about some of the timelines that are all crossing right now, is that after the SEC completes its community reinvestment and workforce proposal, the SEC may submit it and request funds from the account. As I mentioned earlier, the Social Equity and Innovation Funds amounts have to be appropriated by the General Assembly in the budget that's enacted. It's part of the budget in that manner. So I think that's just some considerations I wanted to bring forward before we get into maybe more of the brass tacks of the budget. And I'll come off PowerPoint now.
Councilman Pilka, thank you so much. Questions from, yes, Councilman Jefferson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The 23 budget, the line item for workforce development is about $5 million. The community reinvestment fund and workforce development line item is about $1 million. That's for 23. So that sounds to me as if, at least this is what I thought I voted on, was to begin that process, putting in place some sort of framework that will allow us to, number one, determine the needs of the given communities decimated by the war on drugs, and to even find folks who will help us distribute the money in an equitable way, in a sound way, in those communities. So we have 6 million, and obviously for job training, so on and so forth. That's what workforce is here for. So we got 5 million there, and $1 million to set up this framework for us moving forward. So what I don't understand is in the 24, the requested budget was 16 million for community reinvestment. Okay, it's ambitious, but that's for communities that were decimated by the war on drugs. I think we can negotiate on that number, and I think you can even negotiate on the 21 million in the 25 fiscal year. But to have none, zero set aside in OPM's revised budget makes absolutely no sense to me, because we're not being guaranteed anything. So that makes sense. The 23 allows us to create the framework with the monies there. And I think that's about right. None of us really know what it's going to take to set that framework up, but we certainly know we should have a framework set up, and we should have the money to allocate in 24 and 25. We should have a baseline. I don't see why we can't have a $10 million baseline if we got 55 million that's going to roll over into this social equity fund, innovation fund. We should have a baseline there of at least 10 million, so we could tell the community, look, we have 10 million that we can distribute in communities across this state that have been decimated by the war on drugs. That's what I'm terribly confused by, because I don't understand. We have the money to build a framework. By 24, 25, we should be ready to go. And trust me, I don't think you need a roadmap. You go into any community, Hartford, Bridgeport, Waterbury, or even the surrounding towns, New Haven, you go into those surrounding towns and those communities, and you take a survey with those community-based organizations that are serving the community. How many of you need money? And they will all raise their hand. So that's the roadmap. So I'm a little confused as to why we have a zero line item on in both fiscal years, 24 and 25.
So I think that, well, let me step back. If you recall, and this was probably a few months ago, prior to my departure and return, we had talked about the need to be able to clearly articulate what we were going to be using these funds for, right? That did not happen. We did not have a clear articulation of how we plan to use those community reinvestment funds. There needed to be a plan, and I had stated at the time, OPM is going to have a very difficult time approving this money without seeing how it's going to be implemented in practice. The second part of this is, just because it's not listed there doesn't mean that it's not a request. I think one of the slides that Councilman Pelka showed was that SEC can submit and request funds from the Social Equity and Innovation Fund account for the purposes of that community investment. And I am confident that OPM will in fact provide those funds when there is a plan and when there is a clear articulation of how those funds would be used.
If I may add to that, is it really was January 13th is the only document I have of a workforce and community reinvestment plan, and it says draft on it. It's a spreadsheet, it's a Word document. IMRP is still conducting its outreach to come back with recommendations. So the challenge that we're confronted with is, yes, there are funds to be expended in the current fiscal year, and that this year will be over in 5.5 months, so the fiscal year ends. And if this budget moves forward in the manner in which it was originally proposed, the SEC will be on the hook for spending $16.5 million in 12 months to create something to implement that plan for which we just received a draft 2 Fridays ago. So that doesn't mean that the proposal warrants criticism. There's a lot, the market just opened this month. There have been enormous undertaking to get to where we are right now. Social Equity Council just created a subcommittee at the meeting less than 2 weeks ago to look at reinvestment. So what that I think means is that we are in a very good place as a council, because there not only is this annual tax revenue that will be is projected to be collected and deposited into the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. Moreover, we have this one-time funding of a significant amount to be used. And I think what has led to this budget being recommended in the manner that it is that it separates the one-time funding from the ongoing collection of tax revenue. I see where the Councilman Jefferson is coming from, because he doesn't see where he can point to that funding being. And I think that's because what we're bringing back to the council is the operating budget of the SEC, with the confidence that the law is clear that deposits are entered into the Social Equity and Improvement Fund and they're used for its exact purpose. That's the tension.
Councilman Pecker, through you, Madam Chair, the 5.8 million and the 10.2 million for 24-25 is based on a projected taxes to be collected for those fiscal years. That's what our budget is based on, right? So the 24 and 25 is based on that.
Yes.
We can't make any projections around that innovative fund, the innovation fund for use in 24 and 25. We're projecting the taxes. We don't even have to project. We already have the money. We have the money in the innovation fund. I don't see why we can't, even if we cap it, I can't see why we can't put a number, unless someone has, and we're not being transparent here, and I'm not accusing any of you guys of that, but I'm just saying, I mean, unless they have some plans for this money that we don't know about, I don't understand why we can't allocate some money to workforce development. We all know we're gonna need a lot of training out here. We don't have a line item for workforce development. We got 5 million this year. We have nothing for 24, 25. We have to go back and then with community reinvestment, I know folks combine workforce development and community reinvestment, and that's fine too. But at least give us a line item. You take out the first workforce development, put community reinvestment and workforce development, give us some money there. Mm-hmm. Let's have some guarantees for the community. We're supposed to go back to our community and say, we got some money coming. We just don't know how much. That's at best, that's what we're left with in 24, 25. If something goes terribly wrong, and we have 3 million in other expenses, that means we have to use some of those other expenses for what was gutted in our requested budget. 3 million of that got to go cover some of those items, and then what's left is for workforce development and community reinvestment, and that's a scenario that's quite possible. So you got $1 million that we can possibly give away to about 20 cities and towns across this state that was decimated by the war on drugs, because that's all I have to go on. There is no other money in this budget. And I don't think I don't think we should sell that to bring that back to our community. I just don't.
And I don't disagree with you, Councilman Jefferson. I think where I am challenged, right, is if we're going out to the community, we have not yet started having conversations with the community to say, how would you like this money reinvested? And without being able to articulate any sort of sense from the community of how they want this money reinvested, it goes back to my earlier point around, we don't have a plan for how this money, what this reinvestment looks like. And again, just because it's not listed there doesn't mean that we can't we can't request it. I think what OPM is looking for is some context around the dollars we're asking for and how we plan to use those dollars to better serve these communities that are deserving based on their experience through the war on drugs. Councilman Shirley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my question is, first of all, I want to go back to the issue of paying back the general fund. And this is merely to try to understand how it works. So there's a $5 million debt that is due to be repaid. And my question is, does that money come out of what has been allocated to community reinvestment? And does it come out of the first year? So in other words, if we had, I'll make up a number, if we had, let's say, $8 million, does that mean the first 5 would go to pay off the general fund and then we'd have 3 left? I'm just trying to understand how that operates.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the funds, whatever is in the social equity and innovation account, will roll over into the social equity and innovation fund.
Right.
Minus that $5 million that was carved out to support the personnel and other expenses that the state incurred prior to program launch.
Right, and would it come out of the whole amount? And Councilman Jefferson refers to the number that I've heard also of roughly $55 million that is in the account, much more than was anticipated.
Sure.
But nonetheless, it's there. And would it come out of there, or would it come out of the first? I want to make this clear. Come out what we are requesting in the first year. That's so if we're requesting 9, 5 goes away, or should we build our request around the idea that 5 million comes out immediately and goes to the general fund?
So I think the $5 million will come out prior to the rollover.
Okay. Got it. So that doesn't affect our budgeting process.
That's correct.
That 5 million does not affect that. Okay. So I'm afraid I agree with before Councilman Jefferson. Before I say that, what kind of specificity is OPM looking for in terms of around reinvestment?
So, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Councilman Helfand.
No, pardon me, man. I'll just try to start it.
Sure.
I think that as OPM staff have talked to SEC staff and OWS, Office of Workforce Strategy staff about their proposal, OPM has looked for clarity around the estimated number of people to be served, estimated amount of services to be expended per person, a plan for where to implement workforce and community reinvestment, a capture of use of funds for upfront one-time investments versus ongoing commitments along the way. And those are I would say the key elements. I think it's obviously another key question that's been discussed is whether the funds are being used to enhance existing funding lines and existing service delivery systems to enhance what's already is in place that you're building on top of versus creating something brand new.
Got it. Okay.
So it's sort of a clarifying and a crystallizing of the vision for the implementation.
And that's a significant amount of specificity, and I can understand the need for it. I'm just thinking that the amounts available, I keep thinking that more is better. I'm, you know,
Yeah.
at the risk of being overly simplistic, I just feel that,
And I don't disagree with you, Councilman Shirley. I think that especially given what we're trying to accomplish, right? But let me frame it for you this way. Because you'll notice that the line item for personal services, which is the human capital, was untouched, right? Why? Because we're very clear about, we need to hire this position for this, we need to hire this position for that. On the flip side, we're saying we need $10 million for workforce development and community reinvestment, without any real specificity. We did not provide detailed information on, or even, I would argue, maybe basic information on how are we coming to this number of people that we propose to serve? Is this based on some sort of demographic data that has been pulled? And the $10,000 per, have we sort of broke or disaggregated that to say this much might be for childcare, and we're also doing an estimate because maybe not everyone will need childcare. There's, we're at the end of the day, we are talking about taxpayer dollars. And so to that point, we have to be as clear as we possibly can around how we plan to utilize those monies. I don't think anybody on this call or anybody that's been involved with this wants to deny these communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs access to the reinvestment dollars that they deserve. But I think OPM has a responsibility as a steward of taxpayer dollars to be able to provide some clarity as to what those expenditures will look like.
Doesn't the money roll over, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Right. So if you put 10 million in and 10 million is not used, it rolls over into the next fiscal year.
Right. And it's going to be,
It's not
going to
right.
be there anyway. It's in the
understand.
fund.
Madam Chair, if we set up a plan of action, we meet that plan of action. We're capping the amount. Even if we say this hypothetical number of $10 million, you cap it there. We have to build a plan around a $10 million plan, a $10 million giveaway. I don't see your explanation doesn't go far enough to justify not having anything on that line item. It just doesn't.
Okay.
To be specific, we got to spell out everything. Is anybody else asked to do this? People put budgets together all the time. Projections. That's all they are. That's a projection. That's all it is.
But I don't, excuse me, but I don't even think that we're seeing the projection, which is the issue here. There has to be a starting point. And everything that you've said, Jefferson, is clear and understood. But again, it is having a strategy and a game plan to make sure that we can track, in those communities, what the result is, right? So if we're throwing around the $10 million number, and let's say we're going to divide it amongst 5 communities throughout the state of Connecticut, we want to track and see how that money is, one, reinvested, where it's gone, and the results of that, so that we can keep track of it and make a difference. I mean, right now, and I've been on board since September, I have not seen anything in writing that remotely looks like a plan for reinvestment. And then I think that is the cornerstone of what we do. At the end of the day, that's what we're going to be judged on. And I think there has to be some metrics behind, how we do it. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but we can guesstimate just like we do projections. We think it's going to, be this, we think it's going to be that. But we have not even seen, I have not seen that in terms of any kind. And then when does that happen? Do we have the money sitting there and have 3 or 4 months to figure out what that is? I think this is an opportunity to craft and be forced in a position to stand something up to say, look, here's where the money is, here's what's going to be used for, and here's the path that it's going to follow in those communities or for investment. And I think that's kind of where this begins. And I think we look at this not as a taking away money, but a starting point to building what could be great and a big difference in those communities.
Mr. Chair, through you, Madam Chair, what guarantees do we have? You're saying that we can make a request. We can make a request. That doesn't mean the money's going to be there. People are going to go to get to that honeypot. There are going to be other hands in that till now. So what guarantees do we have that our money is going to be locked away and secure for our community? The only way we can guarantee that is by putting it in the operating budget. That's it. You cannot guarantee that if we come up with a plan of action that calls for $7.5 million or even $15 million to serve these communities, that money's going to be there. There's nothing to guarantee that. The only way you guarantee it is the same way you guarantee the fringe benefits and the salaries of our staff, which should be guaranteed, of course. But that's it. That's it. That's the only way you guarantee it. And the day will come and they'll come back to haunt us. We vote for this budget without anything in it. They're going to blame us and everyone, legislators, everyone, the general public, the media, going to throw us under the bus and they're going to say, you voted for it. That was your dumb fault. You voted for it. That's what's going to happen. I've seen this far too often. We have no guarantees. All this is talk and speculation. That's all it is.
So Councilman Jefferson, I definitely empathize with your frustration, and it is a frustration that I share. This request for clarity in the budget is not new. It's not a couple of weeks old. It's not a couple of months old. Been asking for this for several months and the information had not been provided. So now our chickens are coming home to roost. And, I mean, you're right there, but the truth of the matter is there's no guarantee regardless, because, there is no lockbox, right? And I hate to put it out there, but it's the truth. Transportation is the only one that has a lockbox. So there is a world in which that money could be, but I think about like the community and the CIF 2030 and Chairman Robertson can probably talk to that. When folks are requesting money for community investment through that fund, through DCD, they have to provide significant.
Oh, it's a detailed plan. I mean, as I said, because we're inundated from so many different areas, and these are big projects. I mean, they're transformational projects. But, if they come and say, hey, listen, we need $10 million, it's like, and we're going to do something with it. It's like there are a lot of other people that have a detailed plan, and those are the ones that are getting attention. And as I said, that's kind of the situation we're in now. It's like, it's got to start somewhere, and we've had several months to get this off the ground. As I said, I've seen nothing in writing anywhere in terms of the reinvestment. And that's an issue for me. I mean, that issue is just as large as where the money's going. To be looking at the money and not have a plan, that to me is just as egregious.
Well, what kind of going forward, since we can't do anything about the past, so going forward, how can we get this money committed? How do we, can we rely on OPM to commit this money to the Social Equity Council in lieu of a plan, a specific plan as to how it's going to be used? Because I think there is a general plan that I've heard, but to get to the level of specifics that OPM requires, I think that will take some time. And in the meantime, though, I think the fear is that the money will be lost. And that's, that wouldn't be good for any of us, to tell you the truth. That would not be a good look. And so how can we avoid that?
Chairman Shirley, may I pose something to you from another perspective, which is, I think part of it is, and I'll use DCD as an example. It is everyone has skin in the game, right? It's like, so we go through a public-private partnership. So to answer your question in terms of where the rest of that money comes from, a good foundation to dictate where the rest of that money will come from is, here's the money that you have, here's what you've done with it. It's the measure of success with it, right? So you build it, you say, here's what it is, it's successful, there's more money behind it. You continue to grow it that way. But I think it also gives you some credence and something to stand on when you said, hey, listen, we built something, whether it's successful or not, you can find what direction you're going. Right now, we don't have anything built to say, you know, it succeeded or it failed. And so my question is, you know, to get the rest of the, to look at getting the rest of the money, no matter what our scenario is, you got to build something and find out what the success and the failure is. Right now, we're not in that position to even build to figure that out. So I'd like to look at it from that perspective to say, listen, we're looking to build something so we can find the success and add to it. Because I always say this, if you got a great product, the money will follow. And I think what we're looking at in this particular instance is putting together, we're asking to put together a great measurable product. The money will follow. I'm not worried about that. And again, in terms of guarantees, you know, this is kind of how we're going to build it. And it's got to start somewhere. And I really do see this as a first step. So anything other than that in terms of dialogue about money being taken out or pulled away from this community, that's not my venture for why I'm here. I am here, again, it's for social equity and to make sure that we're strategically looking at how that money's going to get out and how we're going to build a strategy to making sure we can measure it and look at it and say, here's what we've done, whether it's in small increments or large increments, but we have to start here.
So would it be fair to say then that we have the amount of money that's in, let's say there's $55 million in that, in the fund. The request has been made for, I think, what, 10.2 of that?
The budget was 16.5 proposal for 2024 and 21.5 for 2025.
All right, and 16.
37.
I don't know where I got 10.2. It was 16.5. And so at this point, OPM came back and said 5.8. And I keep asking the same, I'm repeating what other people have said. So the question would be, what happens with the other, with the remainder, the difference between 16.5 and 5.8, if while we are in the process of putting together a a plan that would be satisfactory to OPM. I hate to state it that way because it sounds like we're on opposite sides, and we're not. I realize we're on the same side, but to get approval for the rest of the capital, that's what I'm asking.
I think through Madam Chair, I think when the governor's budget proposal is introduced, it will not include any adjustments to the percentages regarding social equity and innovation fund, nor will it assign any other uses for deposits into the social equity and innovation fund. So those are two, you were seeking assurances, and I think those are two things that I can state will be in the budget. I think on how does the Social Equity Council access the funds? They need to be appropriated by the General Assembly. So the governor's proposed budget is the first stop through the budget process. So what OPM is proposing is that this recommended budget be based on the estimated revenues under the OFA fiscal note, and the remainder of the funds in the Social Equity and Innovation Fund be used following the development of a plan for the use of those funds. They need to be appropriated at the end of the day, so they need to appear in the final budget as enacted. So OPM is your first stop, and then it moves to the Appropriations Committee and all the way through to the finish line. So when the budget's introduced, depending on what is decided upon and what the outcome is, the recommended budget includes funds living up, budgeted amounts up to the revenue estimates. Then there's a remainder in the Social Equity and Innovation Fund. So SEC develops a proposal. OPM would be happy to provide input. it would be brought to the General Assembly for incorporation in the final budget as enacted. That gives the council time to develop and refine a proposal and seek the funding. So that's in whatever form it would take, but you would have the council would have the ability to seek those lines for the one-time upfront SEIF and would have time to develop the rigorous proposal.
I'm sorry, Mark, SCIF?
Social Equity and Innovation Fund.
Okay, right, thank you, I'm sorry, yeah, got it, okay. Thank you.
I know I want to be mindful of time. I know we have a special social equity council meeting. The agenda just lists recommendations. It does not specify any action to be taken. But I appreciate all of the context and all. Councilman Pelka, thank you for providing that information. Councilman Jefferson, Councilman Shirley, certainly for raising the concerns that you have. I guess what I will close with is, with few exceptions, members of this council are appointed by legislative leadership. And so if there is a concern about preserving what has been allotted in terms of the Social Equity and Innovation Fund, that talking to those legislators and articulating those concerns give us a stronger, I would say, shot at potentially ensuring that the funds are not used for a purpose other than what was intended through this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, appreciate that.
Sure. And so if there is nothing else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.